We talk about what the Ontario Reign are going to look like this coming season and which players could be Kings in the near future on this edition of Locked On LA Kings.
You are Locked On Kings, your daily podcast on the Los Angeles Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, Kings fans, welcome to Locked On LA Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks for making Locked On LA Kings your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. Please like and subscribe if you're enjoying this content. I'm Eddie Garcia, your host of Locked On LA Kings. I've worked in sports media for the past 30 years, 20 plus years at the Fox Sports Radio Network. I'm also co-host of the Puck Podcast, a weekly NHL review show that's been putting out content for the past 17 years. And of course, a passionate LA Kings fan for the past 30 years. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/Locked On today to get started. We are happy to welcome in and back to the show, Jared Shafren. He is manager of communications and content for the Ontario Reign and a contributor to LA Kings Insider. You can follow him on Twitter at Shafrein, Shafreign, and he's also co-host of the Rain Check podcast, and we are happy to have him back on the show. Hey, Jared, how are you?
Eddie, doing great. Thanks for having me again.
We love to have you back on the show. Appreciate your time. I did see a video of you on the ice doing some fundamentals, some stick handling, some shooting, some passing. I don't know that I've ever had a chance to ask you about this, but did you grow up playing the game, or is it something you've gotten into later in life?
Kind of a little bit of both. I grew up playing roller hockey, and I know a lot of people out in California probably play roller hockey. I grew up in New York, but roller hockey was kind of my game when I was a kid. Never got too far down the ice hockey path. Switched over to tennis, but later in life have picked up the adult league and enjoying ice hockey. Now I don't play any roller hockey, but enjoy ice hockey. And the skills video came about, and I still got a long way to go, but I can get around the ice okay. So it was fun to do.
Well, I also started out playing roller hockey back in college and then made the transition to ice. And I've been playing twice a week now for like 20 years and didn't grow up with hockey at all, but became a fan later in life. And now I love it. I'm not any good, but I love it. Now, I there was a really good piece. I don't know if you saw this written in the Hockey News yesterday by Tony Ferrari, which sounds like a fake name. But he talked about the Kings prospect pool, and he said that it was still one of the more intriguing prospect pools in hockey. And I definitely wanted to get into with you about some of those players that are going to be playing with the Reign this coming season. But most recently, as far as activities for the Kings this offseason, was the Kings development camp. And we saw a lot of the top young prospects in the Kings organization there for that event, including all of their picks from the last 2 years in the draft. I know you were out there to check it out. Any general thoughts on how this year's development camp went? Any players that maybe stood out or anything you wanted to share about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's always great to, get a sense of where these players are at. I think for me, it's just nice to kind of, especially as someone who ends up watching them a lot, kind of see how they skate, kind of see what some of their tendencies are. It's hard to compare, where they're at and to know how it translates when you actually get into game action, because, it's just a bunch of scrimmages. There's a lot of practices. So I don't really get too far into like trying to project out who might do what. But, for me, it's more of just like, hey, you get to walk in the locker room and talk to these guys and learn a little bit more about them. Like, got a chance to talk with Ryan Conmey. He's going to be at the University of New Hampshire this year. He was just selected by the Kings. And, he's probably a couple years away from potentially playing for the Reign, but it was just nice to check in. Hey, you're going to school in New England. You just played, last year, and where are you at? Kind of just talking to these guys, learning a little bit more about them. As usual, I would say, the players that look most ready for the pro game are the guys who have been in the pro game or the guys who are about to turn pro. I think Francesco Pinelli is a second round draft pick from a few years ago that most likely will turn pro this year. His time with the Kitchener Rangers is probably over, and he had an outstanding season in the OHL last year. So I had my eye on him a little bit as someone who might be ticketed for the Reign roster. Alex Laferriere is a guy who really excelled in previous camps when he was in Harvard. And now that he's done with Harvard and he is a pro, we know that he's either going to be on the Kings of the Reign. I had my eye on him a little bit. Cole Krieger was on the Reign down the stretch last year. So was checking in with him to see, okay, we saw him in game action during the late regular season and the playoffs. How does he look? Well, he looks a lot bigger and faster than all these other prospects. That should be the case. So that's all good news for some of these guys who have recently turned pro. And, for some of the other guys like Jack Hughes, who still have a few more years maybe out from their time before they turn pro, he's a very dynamic player and, just kind of good to check in. But it's hard to put too much stock into what you're seeing as far as how that's going to translate. More just nice to see what the Kings have in their system and just kind of remember, oh, yeah, we have all these guys.
It is kind of an interesting mix, right? Because you've got guys that were just drafted and they're getting their first taste of being in a professional environment. And then you've got somebody like a Brent Clarke who, it seems like he could have played in the NHL last season if things, if the rules had been, able for him to do that kind of a thing. So it's kind of almost like, for some guys, they're just getting their feet wet a little bit. For other guys, it's like, okay, I've done this once before. And then for other guys, it's like, okay, this is kind of the last time I'm going to have to do this and can then move on kind of with the development. So it's an interesting mix, isn't it?
Absolutely. And I think really what it is too for a lot of the coaches, the development coaches, and some of the strength and conditioning staff here for the Kings in the Reign, it's a check-in almost for the offseason of when you look at a lot of these guys who were with the Reign last year, or like a Brandt Clarke who is kind of back and forth, they do a lot of testing, and it's both testing in the weight room, testing with your body makeup, and they kind of check in. How's your off-season training going? Some of these guys, if they were in junior last year, maybe they finished in April, and so it's been a couple months. Now it's June. Are they gaining muscle mass? Are they gaining speed and quickness? They do some on ice testing as well with how your stride is and how quickly you can get around. Is there improvements being made? If so, awesome. Means that they're doing the programs they're supposed to be doing in the off season. If not, maybe they need to adjust something. Why isn't something going the way they wanted? The development staff has these specific plans for each one of these players. And so it's kind of a checkpoint on, okay, we know you wanted to gain, let's say 10 pounds this summer. You've gotten 7. Wow, you're way ahead of things. You can adjust your training, or you've only gained 2 pounds, or maybe you haven't gained any weight. You really got to step on it because you only have a few more months before the training camp next year and rookie camp for a lot of these guys. So you need to adjust your training and you need to maybe take it more seriously. Like different guys have different methods and models for what they're trying to do. They all have off-season strength coaches and workout coaches that they're working with as well. So sometimes it's someone from the Kings might need to check in with X player's coach and say, hey, we noticed that this player is not doing the things, or they're not getting the gains that they're looking for. They need to, meet and stay more on top of them, or maybe they need to work out more times, or maybe they're working out too much and they were tired at development camp, so they need to do less. It's kind of one of those check-ins to really see how their off-season training is going. And obviously for the guys who are over in Europe, it's really one of the only times they get to be over here. So it's more of a check-in with those guys as far as how did your season go? What do you want to do next season? What are your goals? How can we better help you? Maybe a Kings scout might say, we only got over to, Europe to see this player in Finland play once. Next year, let's go twice, And so I think that's just kind of a little bit of a check-in.
Now, up next, the Kings have their rookie camp, which will lead into the rookie face-off in Las Vegas this year, which is coming up in September. Last year, they had it in San Jose. Any idea on some of the players who might be involved in that for the LA Kings? And I also want to ask you, do they rotate that kind of tournament? And is it possible it could be in LA here next year or in the future?
Yeah, I'll start first with the roster. I think, anybody who was at development camp, who is not a college player. So any of the guys who are going to college, I mentioned Jack Hughes before. He's a good example. He's actually going to be transferring this year. Jack Hughes is expected to go to Boston University. Therefore, he is not eligible to play in the rookie tournament. So if you take that development camp and you wipe out the invitees, which some of them could still go to rookie camp, but the invitees not guaranteed anything, and you wipe out anybody, Braden Doyle, Ben Meehan, Jack Hughes, as I mentioned, guys who are going to college. Jared Wright is a college player at Denver. You wipe out those guys. The remaining players all should be guys who you can kind of look at as a potential player for the rookie face-off in Las Vegas. So, a couple guys who stand out, obviously some returning players for the Reign, like Samuel Hellenius, who's pretty young. He turned pro. Casper Simontival could potentially come back and play in that rookie showcase. Atu Jamson can play in it. Anybody who is not going to college, who the Kings have their rights in the future, those guys can all play. Jacob Dvorak should be there, and now that he's signed his entry-level contract with the Kings, a second-round pick from this year's draft, I would expect him to play in that rookie face-off. And, if he's healthy, that would be a great opportunity for him, a guy who just got drafted. So, still a little bit young, but a great opportunity for him to go up against some other top prospects for the Kings. I do know in goal that Erik Portillo plans on participating. He turned pro when he finished Michigan at the University of Michigan this past year, and he's expected to be with the Reign this year. Portillo should play in that. Jacob Ingham, who's actually played a whole bunch at that tournament in the past, is also expected to play. He was signed by the Reign to an AHL contract for this upcoming season. So I think those are two goalies for sure. They could add a third goalie as well, but there's nobody else that the Kings have goalie-wise who was at development camp that we could put in that. So maybe it would be like an invite person that would get the third goalie spot if they decide to bring a third goalie. And obviously, I'm not sure if the Kings want Brent Clark in this event again, but it's something he's certainly eligible for. And guys anyone who was on that development camp roster, maybe a Martin Chromiak, maybe an Alex Laferriere, those guys are eligible for the rookie face-off. So that's kind of a decent idea of who you might expect to see. Cole Krieger maybe as well on defense. As far as the rotation, it is a rotation. I do believe the Kings were supposed to be in that rotation. However, I believe they opted not to host. So we could see the Kings. They are eligible to host it. I do think, it's a little bit of a different setup for the Kings. I mean, some of these teams, San Jose was eager to host it last year because they have a brand new facility for their AHL team, the Barracuda. And that facility now has, I think, 6 sheets of ice in the San Jose facility. So it was great because they had all these different locker rooms and sheets of ice. And here at Toyota Sports Performance Center, where the Kings offices are and where the Kings and Reign practice, they do have 2 sheets of ice, but not many locker rooms. So, it's something where the Kings, if they wanted to host this, would maybe have to get Crypto.com Arena involved. Obviously, their schedule is chaotic and not always available for something like this, or, look at hosting it somewhere else. Because I'm not sure that the current configuration at TSPC is enough for all of the teams that they would need. I think there's 6 teams that are involved at this rookie face-off. So it is going to go to Vegas for the second time. And I'm not sure, if the Kings can get back in that rotation or what their interest is in hosting it. But I do believe all these teams that are in it are kind of rotating it. The last time that the Coyotes hosted it in Arizona a couple of years ago, their situation was a lot different too. So, some of these teams, as the situation changes, might change their interest in hosting the event. But I do think the Kings at some point were supposed to have it and may have elected to push that down the road a little bit.
More with Jared Shafren from the Ontario Reign. Going to get into some specific names that you're probably familiar with. We'll do that in just a moment here on Locked on LA Kings, your team every day. First, though, it is time for you to take your swings at betting on Major League Baseball on FanDuel, and you can get 10 times your first bet amount back in a bonus bet up to $200. That's right. Just bet $20 and you can land $200 in a bonus bet, win or lose. That's $200 you can spend on everything from betting the money line to the over-under or who you think might hit the first home run. It's all on an app that is safe, secure, and super easy to use. Plus, when you win, you get paid instantly. There is no better place to bet on Major League Baseball than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So sign up today and visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get up to $200 in a bonus bet. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, official partner of Major League Baseball. We continue with Jared Shafren, the manager of communications and content for the Ontario Reign and a contributor to the LA Kings Insider. Obviously, Brent Clark is the big name for the LA Kings this season as far as the young player that can come in and maybe make an immediate impact. We saw him a bit with the Reign and the Kings last season, but now he's a full-time pro. I think there's a lot of expectations for sure, but there is a chance that he could start off perhaps with the Ontario Reign and then move over to the LA Kings. Any thoughts on what you think his career will start for Brent Clark? Would you think he's ready to start in the NHL, or do you think he could benefit maybe from a transition from the AHL to the NHL?
That's tough to say. I think it depends on a few different things. I think it depends on how Jordan Spence looks. I think he's clearly in competition with Jordan Spence, who is a little bit older, who's played more pro games. I think obviously the talent and the ceiling of Brent Clark is extremely high, and so maybe a little bit higher than Jordan Spence. And I'm sure the Kings are eager to get him more games in the NHL, but we'll have to see how it shakes out. Obviously, in the preseason, if Brandt is looking like he's earned that spot, I don't see any reason why he wouldn't start with the LA Kings. But if he's looking like he needs more time, or Jordan Spence is looking like he's earned that spot, or potentially both of them could be on the roster and the Kings could elect to carry a different type of makeup. I think it definitely depends on how Brandt is playing, how Jordan Spence is playing, and then what Todd McClellan, Rob Blake, and the rest of the staff decide is important for this team and how they want their makeup to be. So I think ultimately it doesn't really matter what the roster is like on opening night. It matters what's the roster at Christmas, how, and what's the record at Christmas, and has Brent Clark captured that roster spot and he's jumped into that role and he's looking like what, a lot of fans are expecting him to look like, or, maybe that's not the case. I mean, we've seen, similar type of thing with Quinton Byfield. He was up, he made the team, he got hurt, he got sent down. He was, used in a variety of different roles. And, that could happen with Brent Clark. It also could be that he's ready and they don't need to send him down. So I think that's kind of a number of different factors at play, but hard for any one of us to really speculate what it would be like, because he hasn't played enough pro games for us to see him on a consistent basis, what he can do at this point in his career, So I think definitely, intriguing, and, a player who we can surely expect to see games with the Kings at some point this year. But whether it's going to be right off the hop or not, I mean, last year he played in every single Kings preseason game, so he was close. They were definitely taking the longest possible look. Maybe this year they might not do that. Again, they can elect to have him in the rookie faceoff, or they can say he's past this rookie faceoff. We're going to get him right into preseason games and let him go right into camp. So that'll probably be the first step of seeing whether he's on the roster for the rookie faceoff. I think the Kings have really valued that event, so it's probably a safe bet to say that he would be on that roster. I mean, a guy like Quinton Byfield was on that roster as recently as last season. So you would think the way that Rob Blake and Todd McClellan have kind of managed this is, if the player's eligible, we have them there. But they might say, well, we want Brent Clark to go to Australia this year and be involved in that event, and maybe we don't need him to do the rookie faceoff, because those two things are kind of going to happen at the same time. So if they elect to bring him on that roster that's going to go over to Australia, then he wouldn't do the rookie faceoff, and then he'd come back from Australia and start getting ready for the season. So a lot of question marks that still have to be answered, but ultimately I think it's safe to say that he'll either be on the top pair with the Reign or the third pair with the Kings.
Sticking with the defense on that third pairing on the left side, maybe an opportunity for Tobias Bjornfot to get back into the NHL. I know the Kings have also brought in a guy in Andreas Englund this offseason who could be in competition for that job as well. But, Bjornfot, like Clark, a former first-round pick, does it seem like this is his big opportunity to kind of make his, return to the NHL, if you will, after getting some time the year before?
Definitely, especially with the Kings not bringing back Alex Edler and then not really signing an established NHL player for that role. Obviously, you mentioned Andreas Englund, and he's been in the NHL before. He's a big body. He's very physical. Brings a completely different type of game than Tobias Bjornfot. So, it's not really to me like, oh, Bjornfot's competing with Englund because they do different things. It's going to really, I think if Tobias Bjornfot shows up to camp and has the type of camp the Kings would like him to have, then the Kings could make a decision like, hey, we really need him here. He's what we want. He's what we need. He can absolutely earn an every night role on the blue line. If it doesn't go the way that they're hoping, it could be a couple different scenarios. Unlike last year when he was up and down, he could be moved freely from the Kings to the Reign without having to go through waivers. This year he would have to pass through waivers. So I think that helps him a little bit for staying on the roster because the Kings certainly don't want him to be claimed. Obviously, a first-round pick, someone they think highly of, someone who's played a lot of NHL games already in his young career. So, kind of the same thing was the same with Brent Clarke. It kind of depends on how he shows up, but clearly there's nobody necessarily in front of him that's a major roadblock. I think Kevin Connaughton, another player who is a left shot defenseman that the Kings did pick up in the Cal Peterson trade with the Philadelphia Flyers. He's played a lot of NHL games. So that could be someone who potentially, depending on how this shakes out, could also kind of be bidding for a role on the NHL roster on the left side of the defense. But clearly, as a former number one pick, as someone who's been through this system, who's developed by this team with this coaching staff, Tobias Bjornfot looks like a really good, solid person that you would think would fit in that spot and hopefully develop into, that third pairing left side defenseman that the team can count on in a shutdown defensive role.
We go from a couple of defensemen to your ultimate defender, the guy between the pipes and net. You mentioned his name earlier. I think a lot of people are really excited to see what Erik Portillo can do coming over, playing, for a high level team at the collegiate ranks with the University of Michigan and going to a couple of Frozen Fours. Maybe he's the future in net for the LA Kings. We'll have to see on that. But this is his first chance to get into professional hockey, as I assume being the number one netminder for the Reign this season.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know about number one. He's definitely going to get a lot of playing time, but I think, David Riddick or whoever doesn't make the LA Kings roster will probably be the number one for the Reign. I think, the Kings have Phoenix Copley, Cam Talbot. David Riddick is a guy who's maybe just a hair below those two, if at all. I think he's going to compete for a job with the Kings. And if he doesn't make it, I think he's probably the safe bet to be the number one goaltender for the Reign. I think Erik Portillo has not played in a full pro season before. And, college season is at maxing out at about 40 games. So I don't think that he's probably going to be pushed into a heavy workload right away in his first pro season. I do think, it's interesting coming from Michigan because yes, that's a high level team. Yes, they've had a lot of success making the Frozen Four, winning, Big Ten, doing a lot of great things. But you look at the roster that's around him, he probably wasn't seeing as many high quality opportunities because they've had a ton of NHL players on that roster, a little bit different than, some other goaltenders. Another example is like Phoenix Copley. When Phoenix Copley was in college at Michigan Tech, there wasn't a lot of NHL players at Michigan Tech. Matt Roy went to Michigan Tech. But other than a guy like Matt Roy, maybe one or two others, that was a pretty low-level college team. So Phoenix Copley was busy. He had a lot of shots to turn aside. He had to have his head on a swivel. Erik Portillo, yeah, he had some big-time experience, but you're also playing with some of these future NHL players. And so sometimes, it doesn't lead to the most high-quality opportunities. And you can kind of go long stretches of game without seeing high-quality shots. So I think he's definitely going to be eased in. I think he's definitely going to get some playing time for the Reign. He's a high priority for someone that the organization wants to develop, but I'm not sure that he is so close to the NHL that he's going to be garnering major minutes. I think it's probably safer to bet that he would be in a backup role or maybe a split role with whichever goaltender doesn't make the LA Kings roster. Now, injuries can change things, and the way that he plays can change things. If Portillo is looking like he's earning more time, then maybe towards the second half of the season, things could change. But I think right now it's probably safe to say that, they're going to be a little more conservative with his minutes the first couple weeks and months of the season.
A little bit more with Jared Shafren. We're going to talk about some of the Kings forward prospects in a moment here on Locked On LA Kings, your team every day. Hey, check out Locked On NHL for the latest news from around the National Hockey League Monday through Friday. Still some things to be talking about around the NHL this offseason. If you want to stay on top of all of the news, again, check out Locked On NHL. It's available on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. Let's wrap it up with Jared Shafren, co-host of the Rain Check podcast, and get some thoughts on some of the forwards. Alex Turcotte is a name that has been talked about a lot. We know about the injury issues, another former first-round pick, just wanting to finally see what he can do if he can stay healthy. What's the latest you've heard on Alex Turcotte coming into this season?
I haven't heard much, which is great. That means no news is a good news for Alex Turcotte. Usually when there's news around him, it means he might be injured. But as far as I know, he's very healthy. As far as I know, he is ready to come in and fight for a spot on an NHL roster. I'm not sure that he is going to end up being on the Kings roster, at least to start the season, just the way that the numbers work out. And also, based on what Rob Blake was saying at the end of last year, he was basically saying that we need to see more healthy stretches from Alex Turcotte before he's ready to make the NHL. That said, I mean, when he was in the Reign lineup, and I think we've probably talked about this, he's so effective at the AHL level. It's just he hasn't been in enough games. But when he's been there, he's been a big reason why the Reign have won games. He's really effective on both sides of the puck. He plays shutdown defense. He skates extremely well. His motor is just constant. He is such a fun player to watch because when he's on the ice, he's always around the puck. He's either carrying the puck, distributing it to his teammates, setting up things on the offensive end, or doing things that get the puck back if the Reign don't have possession. So he clearly drives play at a level that you'd love to see. And I think his instincts are getting better and better. And when he was on the ice last year, easily one of the best 2 or 3 forwards for the Reign. No question in my mind. I think he's, a guy who's going to be in that top 6 role, along with a lot of talented players that could make their way to the Reign, depending on how the Kings roster shakes out. There's a lot of different talent that'll be around him. And I think that's exciting. It'll be interesting to see if now that the Kings have Pierre-Luc Dubois and Quentin Byfield has moved over to the wing, at least for now, but knowing that he might move back to center, the Kings not sure if they're going to ever need Alex Turcotte to be the center they maybe thought that he was when they drafted him. And so even with the Reign, he's still been playing center. Head coach Marco Sturm said he's best at center. He's best for us at center. That's good for us winning games. But maybe the Kings could say coming into the year, let's see what he does at wing. Maybe he gets shifted over to the wing because that's maybe where he fits in at the NHL level when he does have a spot to come in and contribute. Whereas previously he's been playing center for the Reign, but when he's come in and contributed for the Kings, he's been on a wing. So maybe he gets shifted over. I'm not sure how that's all going to work out. The Reign still have TJ Tynan as a top center. Mikhail Maltsev does play center. He was signed by the Kings, and if he doesn't make the Kings, he is a dynamic top 6 center in the AHL. So he's a guy that could be a center. Akil Thomas is expected to be healthy and playing with the Reign at the start of the season. He is a very solid center that can play both ends of the ice. So Samuel Hellenius, a second-round pick, also a guy who the Kings want to continue developing at center. So it's not like they don't have enough players at center for the Reign that they couldn't move Turcotte to the wing. But if they decide, nope, we still want him to be a center, well, he might end up being, a third-line center. Whereas if they have him on the wing, probably going to be in the top 6.
And one more player, I know you mentioned him briefly, but Francesco Pinelli is a guy who's coming off a great junior career with the Kitchener Rangers, was the captain there. Certainly seems like he's kind of proven everything he's going to prove at that level. Is he expected to join the Reign this season?
Yeah, he is expected to turn pro, and obviously things can change, but I do believe he'll most likely be with the Reign. I kind of look at him like Martin Chromiak was last year, a guy who was injured to start the year, but when he was in the lineup, he was more of a bottom six winger, not expected to produce a ton. But then when injuries cropped up and there was opportunity, Chromiak did move into the top six and started producing. It took him a little while to get the hang of the pro game. I think it's going to take Francesco Pinelli a little while to get the hang of the pro game. I don't think he's going to jump in and be a huge impact, big contributor right away for the Reign. I think some people might be a little surprised to hear this, but I wouldn't be surprised if he's in a bottom six role to start, even though he has that high-end talent, and I think one day could be in the NHL and could be a point producer. I don't know that he's going to fit into the top six right away if everyone is healthy and the Reign get all the guys that they think that they're going to get. But that's great for him because he won't have so much pressure right off the bat. He can learn the league. He can learn the pro game. It's a much more heavier physical game. You can ask Martin Chromiak, another guy who just lit it up in the OHL. It took him a little while to get used to. I think he went his first, 15, 20 games without scoring a goal. And, hopefully Pinelli shows more production earlier than that. But by the end of the season, Chromiak could be counted on in an offensive role. He had a great January. And again, he's a guy who is also going to be hopefully a top six guy for the Reign. So I don't know that you're going to put Pinelli ahead of Chromiak, but I think there's enough room for everyone. It's just, you look at the numbers and I'm not sure Pinelli's going to take a job away from some of the more experienced players the Reign are slotted to get, but he should be a contributor if he's with the team this year. And I would think, like you said, he's proved a lot at the OHL level. And I think it's time for him to get into the pro game and start learning there.
That is Jared Shafren. He is manager of communications and content for the Ontario Reign. He's a contributor to LA Kings Insider. You can follow him on Twitter at Shafrein, Shafreign, and also co-host of the Rain Check podcast. Jared, great stuff. Always appreciate your time. Thank you so much for joining us. Looking forward to this coming season for the Reign and the Kings, and talking to you again at some point in the near future.
Yeah, thanks, Eddie. Appreciate you having me on. And definitely a lot right now in the off season. It seems like the year's still far away, but so much that to be excited about. A lot of different players that are going to be fun to watch this year.
All right, Jared, thanks, and enjoy the rest of your off season.
Thanks.
All right, that was Jared Shafren again. Always appreciate his time. Great stuff there. Hope you guys enjoyed that. Before we sign off here, just a reminder that coming up on Friday, it's our weekly LA Kings fan feedback show. All your questions and comments, you can talk about anything that Jared talked about or ask any questions regarding what he had to say about what's going on with some of the Kings prospects. Again, coming up on Friday, you want to get an email in. The email address is lockedoneddie@gmail.com, EDDIE, lockedoneddie@gmail.com. And you can also post your comments on the YouTube channel as well in the comments section below. Stay interactive with the show by following us on Twitter and Instagram. We are at Locked On LA Kings. I'm Eddie Garcia. Thanks as always for listening and watching this episode of Locked On LA Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Have a great day. We'll talk to you on Friday. And as always, go Kings, go.